Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 236. Change in significance exercise. First, think of a complaint that you have or that someone in your life has made about you. Second, notice which of the three forms best describes this complaint. If you can decide, change the wording a little so that it fits one of the forms. First form, X causes Y. Second form, X is/means Y. Third form, I, he or she, is to X for Y context, X in Y. Cause-effect. After identifying the existing cause-effect, set it aside and think of another cause-effect that is either implied by the statement or could exist in the event or category described by the statement. What else was a cause of this event, or what else is likely to happen as a result of it? First, match the existing cause-effect and then lead to the new one you have selected. Equivalence. After identifying the existing equivalence, think of other equivalents that could be present. What else could this event mean? First, match the existing equivalence and then lead to the new one you have selected. Context. Identify the context that person is thinking of. This is often not stated, so you may have to ask if it is not obvious. Then separate the behavior from the context and set aside that context. Then think of a different context in which the behavior would be appropriate or advantageous. First, match the present context and then make a statement about the event in the different context. Using a different form. At other times, it may be more useful to match the form of someone's current meaning and then lead into a different form, particularly if you think that it will be useful to expand what they already do. For instance, you could replace a cause-effect meaning with a different meaning based on equivalence or context, rather than another cause-effect. This may be a little more difficult for them because it is a change in process as well as content, but the resultant change in meaning may also be greater because it directs their attention to a scope that they have been ignoring, and this is likely to result in a greater change in categorization and response. These patterns of change in meaning are identical to the patterns used in all humor and creativity, what Arthur Koestler called bisociation. A joke begins with a familiar scope and/or category and then switches to another one at the punch line. A creative leap connects a problem with something that was not previously recognized as relevant to its solution. A allowing us to think about it in a new and different way. I will discuss the patterns of humor in more detail at the end of chapter 13. Practicing these patterns for changing meaning teaches you how to help someone else understand something in a different way, but it's also an enjoyable way to increase your flexibility in thinking and problem solving. Take any ordinary thing or event. Notice the meaning that you find in it, and playfully find other meanings by thinking of other cause-effects, equivalence, and contexts. Take any ordinary thing or event. Notice the meaning that you find in it, and playfully find other meanings by thinking of other cause-effect, equivalence, and contexts. The art of changing significance. If we think of a scope as an atom of meaning, a category is a simple molecule composed of a group of scopes. The three different forms of significance are like even larger molecules of meaning. The three different forms of significance are like even larger molecules of meaning. Like real molecules, they can be put together in a variety of ways to create even larger ones. For instance, seeing someone smile in a particular way could be seen as equivalent to the category love, making you think of the consequences for you in the present context. Those consequences might have equivalences, and those might have certain consequences in a different context, etc. Our mental life is a continual chain of these meanings. Even when nothing much is happening, that also has a significance. Someone could categorize that as boredom, a welcome break, or fearful anticipation of what comes next, etc. Despite the complexity of this ongoing chain of meanings, when they are problematic, you can always slow down the process and examine a single step to find out which atoms and molecules of meaning are present and change them. Practice and fluency in the different patterns of meaning gives you flexibility and artistry in changing them. It is also very useful to have some all-purpose changes in meaning that can be applied to many different events. For example, it seems to me that person's response tells you much more about them than it does about you. Is a useful change in scope whenever someone takes a criticism personally and seriously. If you keep doing what you have been doing, you'll keep getting the unpleasant response that you have been getting. Can elicit motivation to try doing something different rather than more of the same thing that isn't working. When changing to one form of meaning doesn't work with a particular person, you can switch to another, or you can stay with one form and keep trying different content. You can also put several different changes in scope or category into a single response, giving it much more impact than any of the different individual ones would have separately. Consider the following past possible response to the complaint I used as an example earlier. You're being late for our date means that you don't care about me. I'm really glad you brought this up because I know how difficult it is for you to talk about your feelings, and you are talking about them is a measure of how important our relationship is to both of us. And if you hadn't mentioned it, your concern would probably have affected our intimacy in ways that neither of us wants. I was planning to leave work early to be sure to be on time, but then my boss gave me a rush order, and when I finished it, that put me right in the peak rush hour traffic. A few times I was tempted to run a yellow light to save time, but then I thought to myself, I'll bet she'd rather I get there late than not at all. Strategy and delivery. Offering a new meaning is like telling a good joke. Its effectiveness depends greatly on your delivery. Matching someone's experience. Nonverbal expressiveness, timing, tonality, volume, and tempo shifts. The setup that creates a context for the punchline, etc. Often it is very tough. Offering a new meaning is like telling a good joke. Its effectiveness depends greatly on your delivery. Matching someone's experience. Nonverbal expressiveness, timing, tonality, volume and tempo shifts. The setup that creates a context for the punchline, etc. Often it is very helpful to loosen or change the meaning that someone already has before offering a new one. Sometimes this has been called deframing, removing or changing an old frame to make it easier for someone to accept a new one. Often it is very helpful to loosen or change the meaning that someone already has before offering a new one. Sometimes this has been called deframing, removing or changing an old frame to make it easier for someone to accept a new one. For example, if the complaint is I'm too quiet and retiring in social situations, the implication is that it is good to speak up and be more assertive. If you change this existing meaning first, it makes it much easier for someone to accept a new one. If you know, I have been to a lot of parties where one or two people monopolize the conversation. Sometimes they tell lots of jokes or long stories without ever noticing whether or not anyone wants to hear them. Often it seems to me that their mouth is just running on automatic pilot, and they don't really have much to say, and aren't sensitive to others. This provides several unsavory new meanings for speaking up, and it is also an example of aggregate scope, creating a group of similar meanings. In this case, token indicates superficiality and intensivity. I often find myself waiting for one or one of the quieter people to speak up. Maybe it is because they took the time to really think about the interests and feelings of others before talking. Or perhaps it is because they carefully thought about exactly what they wanted to say before speaking. But often I find that a sentence or two from one of those quieter people is worth 24 from one of the more outspoken ones. And I think of the old saying, "Still water runs deep." No matter how complex or clever the content and delivery of your new meaning is, it will only succeed if it fits into this particular person's worldview, including their beliefs, values, criteria, outcomes, etc. Ultimately, someone's response, both nonverbal and verbal, is the only measure of the effectiveness of a change in meaning. When someone rejects a new meaning that you offer them, their response often gives you useful information about their criteria that can help you revise what you said or offer a new meaning. Once, when I was working with a young woman, I asked, "How would you like it if you automatically had this new response in appropriate future situations?" She wrinkled her nose in disgust and replied, "I don't like it. It sounds so mechanical." When I said, "Okay, how would you like to have this new response spontaneously in future situations?" She smiled and loved it. To me, the two descriptions were equivalent and interchangeable, but one fit her world much better than the other. Big meanings. So far, we have been applying the understandings of scope and category and the structure of meaning to fairly small, though often very significant events. How about the much larger meanings, often called beliefs, which often carry connotations of immutability or religion? Just as word only indicates the thing or event named, a verbal statement of belief is only a way to communicate an experience to someone else. Just as word only indicates the thing or event named, a verbal statement of belief is only a way to communicate an experience to someone else. What is your experience of a really big question like, "What is the meaning of life?" or "What is my purpose on earth?" These are questions that have been asked for thousands of years. They seem to be important questions, partially because the scope is so large, and also because meaning is itself meaningful to us. We want our life to count for something, and not just be a fleeting random event with no significance at all. Many of us find meaning in our lives by thinking of a larger scope of time, hoping that our lives leave something positive for future generations. Then, if circumstances seem to indicate that we will leave nothing behind of value, life can seem meaningless, and we may complain that what difference does it make? Nothing that I can do will make a difference in 50,000 years. But if that is true, It must also be true that nothing that will be the case in 50,000 years makes a difference now either. In particular, it doesn't make a difference now that in 50,000 years what we do now won't make a difference. This quote probably leaves you a little dizzy, both because of the shifts in scopes of time, its looping structure of nested categories, and also because it disrupts our usual ideas about how causality works across time. Notice that it also presupposes that the meaning of someone's life is found in relation to others, an important clue. Ray Baumeister has described 4 primary ways that people find meaning in their lives, summarized from a wealth of research. First, purpose. Meaning is in relation to long-term future goals or outcomes. Children, job, the development of art or scientific knowledge, etc. Second, efficacy. Meaning is based on positive sensory-based feedback in the present that confirms capability, control, and power over events. Third, traditional morality. Meaning is found in following a set of rules and prohibitions based on a social or religious value system. Fourth, self-worth. Meaning is derived from self-other comparisons that result in feeling superior to others because of greater status, intelligence, privilege, achievement, possessions, etc. Purpose. Meaning is in relation to long-term future goals or outcomes, children, job, the development of art or scientific knowledge. Efficacy. Meaning is based on positive sensory-based feedback in the present that confirms capability, control, and power over events. Efficacy. Traditional morality. Meaning is found in following a set of rules and prohibitions based on a social or religious value system. And fourth is self-worth. Meaning is derived from self-other comparisons that result in feeling superior to others because of greater status, intelligence, privilege, achievement, possessions, etc. Self-worth and efficacy are pretty similar, in my opinion. These 4 different ways provide quite different meanings, but what they have in common is that they all use verifiable sensory-based feedback. You can usually know when you are making progress toward a goal, or you are able to do what you set out to do. You can know whether or not you are following a traditional morality or where you are on the ladder of status, with your feet on the fingers of the person on the rung below you and your fingers under the feet of the person above you. With your feet on the fingers of the person on the rung below you and your fingers under the feet of the person above you. Whatever someone's ways of measuring meaning, when life events take away their evidence, they are likely to find their life meaningless. When a future goal seems unattainable, efficacy disappears as a result of age, injury, or illness. The basis for a morality or status vanishes, or self-other comparisons are no longer favorable. The meaning based on it can also disappear. However, this vulnerability is based on a limited scope. They are focused only on present scope of time and only on themselves. If they were to think of a broader scope of time, extending into the past, and how all that they have done over the years has affected others, they would have a more stable basis for meaning that would extend into the present. The meaning of what they have done in the past endures in the lives of others than they have affected, even when a change in circumstances doesn't allow that feedback in the present. Some may find one or more of Baumeister's 4 meanings to be adequate, but others would say that they don't really answer the question, what is the meaning of my life? Since one of the problems with big questions of meaning is that they are so large in scope, it can be interesting to ask the same question, what is the meaning of blank, but apply it to a much smaller scope. For instance, if we ask, what is the meaning of saying hello? Or what is the meaning of apple? It becomes obvious that so much is missing in the question that it is impossible to answer it. The main thing missing in the question, what is the meaning of my life, is meaning for whom. An apple has a very different meaning to a worm, a hungry deer, a poet, a scientist, or someone who doesn't like apples. From our perspective, we can see that the tree produces apples as part of its nature, one of millions of species that exist because they are successful at reproducing themselves. But as far as we know, an apple has no meaning to itself or to the tree that produces it. It is simply part of the tree's functioning. It is easy to forget that meaning is always relational. A thing that cannot have a meaning for itself, only to someone else. Apples have no self-awareness, so they can't even think of the question, what is the meaning of my life? Much less ask it. But if an apple could ask the question, how would it answer it? When we ask the same question of ourselves, can there an answer? An apple can have meaning for other organisms, but not for itself, and the same is true for us. If we are to find a meaning for a question like, what is the meaning of my life? We have to fill in not only the for whom, but all the other missing elements. What is the meaning of apple for whom? In what context? With what consequences? In relation to what outcomes? As measured by what criteria? If we were to leave out most of the ingredients for a cake, we wouldn't be surprised that the result didn't look or taste much like a cake. When we leave out most of the ingredients for creating meaning, it is not surprising that it is hard to find any. Searching for an everlasting transcendental meaning is like trying to make a cake while leaving out most of the ingredients. That's not how you make a cake. When we specify all the ingredients for meaning, we can always find it. If I specify all those missing scopes, I find that I can answer the question quite easily. For instance, if I ask, what is the meaning of my life for my children, and their outcomes and criteria, I can answer it easily, both in specific contexts and more generally. The specific meaning for my son this morning was that I provided warm friendship, interaction, and some information, things that he and I both value. However, if I were to ask, what is the meaning of my life to the postman, I would get a very different answer. Then I am someone to whom he delivers mail, one of many people who provide a reason for his job and livelihood. So my life doesn't have a single large meaning. It has many meanings to many different people, depending on my place in their life. Having found ways in which my life has meaning for others, that has meaning for me.